I had lived in that house for 35 years. Its walls held every laugh, every tear, every memory of my late wife Laura, who had passed after a long, exhausting battle with cancer. Our daughter Emily had been raised under its roof, running down the hallway, in her soccer cleats, baking cookies with her mom in the kitchen, studying for finals at the oak table that had seen more meals than I could count. That home wasn't just wood and stone, it was the archive of my life. On a quiet Sunday evening in early spring, I cooked one of Emily's favorite meals, pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes, just like Laura used to make. Emily had always loved the way the scent filled every corner of the house, comforting and familiar. She arrived with her fiancé, Ryan Carter, a man I had tolerated, but never trusted. He was a surgeon at a major hospital in Denver, polished and confident, the kind of man who seemed to walk into a room believing the world owed him something. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Emily laughed about a work project, her eyes lighting up as she spoke. Ryan, as usual, kept steering the conversation back toward himself, his patience, his promotions, his sacrifices. I nodded politely, listening, but never impressed. My focus was on my daughter, the little girl who had once begged me to let her stay up late to watch fireworks from the porch. I tried to capture that warmth, but it was difficult with Ryan sitting there, his smile too smooth, his compliments too calculated. After dessert, when Emily stepped out to take a phone call from a friend, Ryan leaned back in his chair. He reached into his leather briefcase and spread a neat stack of documents across the oak table. The same table where Emily had eaten cereal before school, where Laura had balanced our checkbook, where I had sat in silence after the funeral. The sight of those crisp papers felt almost offensive, like an intruder setting traps in the heart of my home. Michael Ryan began his voice low, but practiced, "It's time we talk about securing Emily's future." His eyes didn't hold warmth. They held calculation. I looked down at the papers, legal contracts, financial agreements, terms I recognized only partially, but knew well enough to sense danger. At the top of one, in bold print, was my property address, my house. He spoke with the tone of a man used to being obeyed. "Emily and I are planning our life together. It's important she feels stable, that she has the security she deserves. This house is worth nearly $2.5 million, Michael. If you were to transfer the deed into her name now, it would solve a lot of issues. It would also protect you from making poor financial decisions in the future." Poor financial decisions. That phrase hung in the air like smoke. He didn't look at me with respect. He looked at me the way a doctor might look at an incompetent patient. I folded my hands and studied his face. He wasn't asking, he was demanding. And beneath the words there was something sharper, a warning. Ryan leaned forward, lowering his voice further, though Emily was still outside. "I want to be honest with you. You've been through a lot since Laura passed. Everyone can see the grief. Claire, my sister, you know she's an attorney. She's mentioned that sometimes grief leads to impaired judgment. If you don't make responsible choices, someone could argue you're not fit to handle complex assets anymore." The meaning was clear. Sign the papers or he and his sister would paint me as mentally unfit. They would drag my grief into court, twist it into incompetence, and steal my home under the guise of protecting Emily. I should have felt fury. I should have shouted at him, thrown those papers across the room, told him to get out of my house. Instead, something colder settled inside me, a calm resolve I hadn't felt since the days I stood in burning buildings as a firefighter, calculating exits while chaos raged around me. I smiled, not because I agreed, but because I understood exactly what kind of man Ryan was, and because I had been preparing for this moment longer than he realized. "Let me get you something first, Ryan," I said softly, rising from my chair. He looked smug, convinced I was about to fetch a pen. But what I retrieved from my study wasn't a pen. It was the truth I had been building for years. The study had become my sanctuary since Laura's death. Stacks of folders, meticulously labeled, filled the shelves. Phone records, screenshots of social media posts, voicemails from Emily that carried Ryan's influence in every word, statements from neighbors, notes I had taken during conversations where Ryan revealed pieces of his arrogance. I had kept everything not out of obsession, but because deep down I knew this day would come. I walked back to the dining room, holding a thick manila envelope, though I didn't yet reveal its contents. I placed it gently on the table beside his contracts. His eyes flickered with curiosity, then irritation. "You've thought a lot about Emily's future," I said evenly. "So have I." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and unbroken. Emily's laughter from outside drifted faintly through the window, pure and unaware. My chest tightened with the weight of protecting her, not just from the world, but from the man she trusted most. Ryan cleared his throat. "Michael, this is really just about making things easier for everyone. You can stay here, of course. We'd never put you out, but the property would be in safer hands." Safer hands. His words were a blade sharp and deliberate. I thought of Laura, of the nights she clutched my hand in the hospital, whispering that she trusted me to keep Emily safe after she was gone. I thought of the sacrifices, the career I gave up, the savings drained, the endless nights alone. And now, here was Ryan trying to erase all of it with a signature. Instead of answering, I slid the envelope closer to me. My hand rested on it like a quiet promise. When Emily returned cheerful and oblivious, Ryan quickly shuffled his documents, masking his scheme with a bright smile. But I had seen enough. I knew what he was capable of, and I knew with absolute certainty that the battle had begun. That night, after they left, I sat at the table for hours, staring at the empty plates and the envelope before me. My heart ached for Emily, for the storm she didn't yet see gathering around her. But my grief had forged me into something Ryan and his sister didn't expect, not a broken old man, but a fighter with patience and evidence. I whispered into the quiet house as though Laura could still hear me. "Don't worry, he won't take her future, not while I'm still breathing." The trap was set, and Ryan had just walked into it. The memory of that Sunday dinner lingered like smoke in my lungs. I couldn't shake Ryan's voice, polished and professional, talking about protecting Emily and putting my house in safer hands. But the truth was, none of this began that night. The cracks had started years earlier when my wife, Laura, was still alive. It was 2017, and Emily had just introduced Ryan to us as her serious boyfriend. He was still in his residency back then, lean from long hours with a confidence that seemed bigger than the room he walked into. At first, Laura and I wanted to believe the best. Emily was 22, working her first job out of college, bright-eyed and hopeful. She deserved someone steady, and Ryan on the surface looked the part. But Laura noticed things before I did. Mothers often do. She would sit with her tea watching how Ryan handled Emily, how he steered her. At dinners, he always interrupted finishing her sentences like her thoughts weren't worth waiting for. When she shared an idea, he tilted his head with that half smile, correcting her softly, but firmly, making it seem like he was teaching rather than dismissing. One night after they left, Laura said quietly, "He wants control more than he wants companionship." I brushed it off. Maybe it was just his medical training, I thought. Surgeons were taught to be decisive, to lead under pressure, but Laura shook her head. "No, Michael, it's different. He's grooming her to lean on him more than on herself." Those words stuck with me. Grooming, leaning, words I didn't want to admit were true. Then came Laura's diagnosis. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. The day the doctor said the word malignant, my entire world split in half. I still remember the sterile smell of the hospital room, the tight grip of Laura's hand around mine, the look of fear she tried to mask for my sake. Emily was devastated. She cried into my chest like she had when she was a little girl with skinned knees. But Ryan was curiously detached. He told her gently but firmly that she should limit exposure to the stress that constant visits to hospitals would weigh too heavily on her young mind. At first I thought he was trying to shield her, but soon it became a pattern. Every time Laura had chemo, Ryan found a reason why Emily couldn't come. Exams, shift work, weekend getaways. He insisted that being around cancer would affect Emily's outlook on life and damage her mental health. He used medical jargon like armor, each phrase polished to sound reasonable, but I saw through it. Emily, caught between her love for her mother and her love for him, wavered. She still visited, but less. She called instead of coming by. Laura noticed, of course. She always asked, "Is Emily busy again?" Her voice was gentle, never accusatory, but I saw the shadow in her eyes. Ryan's sister Claire entered the picture around this time. A corporate lawyer at a big Denver firm, she carried herself with the same practiced authority as her brother. I met her at a holiday party, sharp suit and sharper smile. She talked about boundaries and healthy separations as though family was just a messy liability in the way of career advancement. When I mentioned how important Emily was to us during Laura's illness, Claire tilted her head and said, "Well, Michael, you don't want to burden her with all of this. Young people need space to build their own lives." Burden. That word tasted like poison. Laura, lying weak in her hospital bed, was not a burden. She was the heart of our family. Yet here were Ryan and Claire planting seeds of distance, reframing love as liability. I tried to fight it. I called Emily, constantly begged her to come, reminded her that her mother needed her. Sometimes she did, but often she'd arrive late, tired, wringing her hands as though she was torn in half. "Dad, Ryan thinks it's too much for me," she'd whisper. And my heart broke each time. During one chemo round in 2018, I counted the calls I made to Emily, 57 over 2 weeks. Ryan intercepted most of them, answering her phone, telling me she was resting, that it wasn't good for her to hear updates every day. I began saving voicemails, each one more dismissive than the last. "Michael, let the professionals handle this." "Michael, you're overwhelming her." "Michael, she needs distance." Laura grew weaker, but she still had moments of brightness. She asked for Emily sometimes, every few hours. I remember one Thanksgiving she wore the green scarf Emily had given her, her face lighting up each time the doorbell rang. But Emily never came. Ryan had whisked her away to Aspen, posting pictures online with captions like, "Learning to put our relationship first." His stories of self-care, ciao boundaries. I saw the post on my phone while Laura slept in her chair by the window, her scarf around her shoulders. I saved the screenshot, my hands trembling with both anger and sorrow. That was the night I began documenting everything. At first, it felt almost paranoid. Why was I keeping records of Instagram posts, receipts, phone logs? But deep down, I knew. Ryan wasn't just steering Emily away out of selfishness. He was building a narrative that her family was toxic, that staying close would harm her, that he was the one stable anchor in her life. And Claire, with her legal expertise, was guiding the script. The cracks grew wider. Emily started echoing Ryan's phrases. She said things like, "Mom's illness is too heavy for me," or "maybe space really is healthier." Her words weren't her own anymore. They were rehearsed lines from someone else's playbook. I stayed silent more often than not, unwilling to push her further away. But inside, my anger solidified into something else: resolve. If Ryan thought grief made me weak, he was wrong. Grief was teaching me to pay attention, to see patterns, to prepare. The moment I realized Laura wouldn't recover was the moment I promised myself that Ryan would never take more from this family than he already had. He had stolen years of Emily's closeness with her mother. He had stolen moments Laura longed for, but he would not steal her inheritance, her memories, or my home. I began organizing the evidence in Laura's old sewing room. I turned it into a war room without calling it that. Folders labeled by year, each filled with proof dates of missed holidays, screenshots of Ryan's posts, copies of bills I paid, alone notes of every excuse. At first it was paper and pen, later voice recordings. Every piece felt like a stone in the foundation of a case I might one day need. Laura passed in 2021, and Emily stood beside me at the funeral, weeping, apologizing, saying Ryan had been on call. I knew better. A neighbor told me later they'd seen him that night at a high-end bar downtown laughing with friends. I added that to the folder. And so, when Ryan finally spread those papers across my oak table years later, thinking he had cornered me, he had no idea. He thought I was a grieving old man, easy prey. But he didn't realize I had been quietly building the story of his betrayal all along. The cracks had started long before, but now the walls were strong. I was ready. Grief does strange things to time. The years between 2017 and 2021 felt both endless and fleeting. Laura's illness became the clock of our lives, measured not by months or seasons, but by chemo appointments, test results, and the subtle decline that comes when disease takes more than medicine can ever give back. Through it all, I tried to be the anchor. But anchors are heavy, and the weight eventually pulls everything else down. I had been with the fire department for 34 years, most recently as a training officer. I loved the job, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose, the younger recruits who looked to me for guidance. But when Laura's cancer treatments ramped up, the math stopped working. Her bills came to nearly $21,000 a month, medications, hospital stays home, health aides, special diets. My salary was $68,000 a year. Numbers don't lie. The math was cruel. I remember sitting in my office at the station in November 2017, staring at the resignation form. My crew tried to talk me out of it, reminding me I was in line for captain's promotion. But I looked at Laura's picture on my desk, her smile wide, her hair still thick before the chemo, and I knew. Promotions, pensions, career pride, none of it mattered compared to being there for her. I signed the papers. Just like that, my life's work ended and a new chapter of caregiving began. Emily cried when I told her. She said, "Dad, you don't have to do this." But Ryan stood behind her, arms crossed, saying nothing. His silence said more than words ever could. Later, he told her I was making an emotional choice instead of a rational one. He never said it to me directly, but Emily repeated it almost apologetically. Rational. That was Ryan's favorite word. Rational was always code for what benefited him. The early years of caregiving were the hardest. I learned how to administer medication, how to change bed linens without disturbing Laura, how to lift her gently when she was too weak to stand. I sat by her side through sleepless nights, counting her breaths, holding her hand, as if my touch alone could keep her tethered to this world. And I did it willingly, because love demands devotion. But devotion had its cost. Our savings dwindled. I refinanced the house twice each time, digging deeper into the security we'd once built for retirement. The house that had been our fortress became collateral, one signature away from slipping out of my hands. I didn't tell Laura the details. Why should she carry that burden too? She had enough on her shoulders. Emily offered help once timidly. She said she could contribute a little from her salary, but soon after she called back in tears explaining that Ryan thought it wasn't wise for her to enable dependency. He convinced her that my financial struggles were my responsibility, that stepping in would only complicate things. I could hear her hesitation, the love in her voice fighting against the logic Ryan fed her, but in the end, his influence always won. I started keeping count of the calls. It sounds obsessive, maybe even petty, but numbers gave me a strange sense of control. In 2018 alone, I dialed Emily's phone 127 times. She answered maybe 20. Ryan intercepted many of them. His tone was always polite, but edged with dismissal. "Michael, she's resting. Michael, she's overwhelmed. Michael, let her live her life." I began writing the dates down in a small notebook. Call logs became proof. Proof became evidence. One evening in late 2018, after Laura had fallen asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a stack of unpaid medical bills. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the numbers, dizzy with the reality that no amount of budgeting would cover them. I thought about calling Brandon. No, not Brandon. That was the competitor's story. I thought about calling Ryan, directly asking him man to man to help, but I already knew what he'd say. He would smile that clinical smile and tell me state assistance programs existed for people like me. He'd say it wasn't his responsibility, and Emily, under his thumb, would nod along. So I bore it alone. I sold Laura's car. I cashed out the small life insurance policy I'd taken decades earlier. I even sold some of my Fire Memorabilia Helmets Plaques awards. Each sale felt like carving off a piece of myself, but it kept Laura comfortable. That was what mattered. In those years, the house began to change. Once filled with laughter and visits from friends, it grew quieter. The dining table, which once overflowed with Thanksgiving feasts, now held pill organizers and stacks of insurance forms. The living room became Laura's resting place, her recliner surrounded by blankets, medical devices, and soft light from a lamp I kept on through the night. I never blamed Emily for visiting less, though the hurt was sharp. I blamed Ryan. I blamed his subtle manipulations, the way he cloaked selfishness in the language of psychology and medicine. Exposure to illness isn't healthy. Boundaries are important. Don't let guilt run your life. His words became hers until I barely recognized my daughter's voice. Still, there were moments of hope. Sometimes Emily came despite his disapproval. She would brush her mother's hair, paint her nails, and for an hour or two the light returned to Laura's eyes. She'd squeeze Emily's hand and whisper, "This is what love looks like." I lived for those visits, though they became fewer each year. By 2020, the pandemic complicated everything further. Ryan used it as the perfect excuse. "Hospitals are dangerous," he told Emily. "Your father's home is risky. Better to stay away." Emily obeyed, visiting only once in months. Meanwhile, I masked up, gloved up, and did what I'd always done, stood by Laura's side. If caregiving was dangerous, then I accepted the danger. She was my wife. When Laura's health declined further in 2021, I knew time was running out. I left one final voicemail for Emily. "Your mother keeps asking for you. Please come." She did arrive that time, standing in the doorway, with guilt etched into her face. Laura, weak but lucid, reached for her daughter. Emily wept in her arms, whispering apologies I couldn't fully hear. Ryan didn't come. He said he was on call. A neighbor told me later he'd been spotted at a rooftop bar downtown laughing with colleagues. I added that detail to the file in the sewing room. The cost of devotion was staggering financially, emotionally, physically. I lost my career, my savings, much of my health, but I never regretted choosing Laura. I regretted only that Emily had been pulled away one thread at a time until the bond between mother and daughter was frayed nearly beyond repair. And so, as I sat in that quiet house after Laura's funeral, staring at the mountain of evidence I'd collected, I understood the truth. Devotion had nearly broken me. But it had also forged me into something Ryan didn't expect a man who would never again be blindsided, never again manipulated. The cost of devotion had been high, but the cost of betrayal that Ryan was about to learn. Holidays used to be the rhythm of our family. Thanksgiving turkeys carved at the same oak table. Christmas mornings filled with wrapping paper and coffee brewing in the kitchen. Even the small traditions, the way Laura always insisted on watching It's a Wonderful Life on Christmas Eve, or how Emily and I would sneak bites of pie before dinner, gave our lives structure and meaning. But once Ryan stepped deeper into Emily's life, holidays became painful reminders of absence. I still remember Thanksgiving of 2018. Laura had been doing poorly that fall, her energy drained from another round of chemo. She insisted on putting on her best dress anyway, a soft blue one Emily had given her years before claiming it made her eyes sparkle. Laura wanted to feel presentable in case Emily showed up. I helped her set the table 3 places, one for her, one for me, one for our daughter. The turkey roasted in the oven, filling the house with warmth. Every 10 minutes, Laura asked, "Do you think she's coming?" I smiled and said, "I'm sure she will." But as the hours passed, the doorbell never rang. At 4:30 that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily, "Sorry, Dad. Ryan planned something last minute. Give Mom my love." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. Later that evening, I opened Instagram out of habit and saw the truth. Emily had reposted Ryan's photo of them at a luxury resort in Aspen champagne glasses raised. His caption read, "Escaping stress and drama to enjoy real life." Shikes grateful Tislager boundaries. I saved the screenshot, my hands shaking. In the living room, Laura sat in her chair, her blue dress hanging loosely on her frail frame. She asked me again, "When's Emily coming?" I couldn't answer. I just knelt beside her and held her hand. Christmas that year wasn't any better. I decorated the house just like Laura used to, garlands on the staircase, stockings hung by the fireplace, twinkling lights on the porch. She was weaker by then, but she smiled faintly when I set the star on top of the tree. She whispered, "It looks perfect." On Christmas Eve, I called Emily. "Your mom's been asking for you all week. Please just come for a day." There was hesitation on the other end, then a sigh. "Dad Ryan already booked us a ski trip. He says I need to stop enabling your dependency on me. He thinks it's healthier if I focus on my relationship." I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell her that her mother's life was measured in weeks, not years. But I stayed calm. I didn't want to push her further into Ryan's arms. That night, as Laura dozed in her recliner, I checked social media again. There they were, smiling in front of a roaring lodge fireplace, glasses of champagne in hand. Emily looked happy, or at least she looked convinced she should be. Ryan's caption read, "Finally learning to put our marriage first." Boundaries, Yarsk self-care, boundaries. That word followed me like a curse. It was Ryan's favorite weapon. He twisted it into justification for every absence, every neglectful choice. And Emily, caught between love for her fiancé and guilt for her mother, repeated it like a script. By 2019, Laura's condition had worsened. She began asking not just for Emily, but for children who didn't exist because Ryan had convinced Emily it wasn't the right time. Too much family instability, he said. "We'll start a family once things are settled." But things never settled. They only drifted further apart. That year, Emily called less and less. When she did, her voice carried Ryan's influence. "Dad Ryan thinks it's harder for me to see Mom this way. He says it's better if I wait until she stabilizes." Stabilizes? As if cancer waited politely for schedules to clear. Holidays became unbearable. Easter 2019, I set out colored eggs like I always had, but the only ones who saw them were Laura and me. 4th of July, I grilled on the deck, fireworks bursting in the sky, while Laura sat bundled in blankets asking why Emily hadn't come. The silence was worse than the noise. Each missed holiday felt like another nail sealing a coffin, not Laura's, but Emily's connection to her mother. I coped the only way I knew: documentation. Every holiday, every absence, every excuse, I recorded it all. I wrote down the date, the reason given the social media post that contradicted it. Thanksgiving 2018 Aspen Resort, Christmas 2018 Ski Lodge, Mother's Day 2019 Wellness Retreat in Napa, Labor Day 2019 Beach Getaway in Malibu. Each line was proof, each entry a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't normal. Laura noticed too. She tried to hide her disappointment, but it leaked out in quiet moments. She used to love decorating the tree, she whispered one evening. Do you remember how she always put the angels slightly crooked? Her voice broke, and I had no answer. By Christmas 2020, Laura's decline was steep. She barely ate, barely spoke. But in rare, lucid moments, she still asked for Emily. "Where's my girl?" she'd murmur. I called Emily again, desperation creeping into my voice. "Please, she needs you." Her reply was immediate. "Dad, Ryan says it's not good for my mental health. He's booked us a holiday in Aspen again. He thinks we should avoid family drama during the holidays." Family drama, that was how they described a dying mother. I didn't argue. I just hung up, walked into the living room, and sat beside Laura. I told her Emily loved her, that she was thinking of her. It wasn't a lie, Emily did love her. But love under Ryan's control had become hollow, muted, smothered by the language of boundaries and self-preservation. That Christmas Eve, I watched as Laura's frail hand reached for the empty chair where Emily should have been. I held her hand and whispered, "She's with us in spirit." Tears slid down her cheeks, and I silently vowed that someday Ryan would answer for every empty chair, every missed holiday, every broken promise. I saved all the screenshots, all the voicemails, all the call logs. I printed copies and filed them into binders, each labeled by year: 2018, 2019, 2020. They filled the sewing room evidence, stacked like bricks in a fortress I was quietly building. Ryan thought grief made me weak. He thought absence would break me. But absence did something else. It sharpened me. It turned me into a record keeper, a historian of betrayal. The holidays that once brought joy became case studies, proof of neglect dressed up as self-care. And as Laura's health declined further, my determination only grew. Ryan had taken holidays from us, but he would not take my home. He would not take the memory of Laura's devotion, and he would not take my daughter's future without facing the truth. By early 2021, the walls of our home felt more like a hospice than a place of family gatherings. The kitchen smelled less of dinners and more of disinfectant wipes. Laura's recliner, the burgundy one she used to curl into with a book, had become her command center pill bottles on the side table, a blanket over her legs, her crossword book abandoned halfway through. Her voice was faint by then. Sometimes she drifted into long silences, staring at the front door as if sheer hope could will Emily to walk through it. She still asked for her, though. "Do you think she'll come?" I always answered yes, though. My chest tightened with each lie. The truth was, I had stopped believing in promises. When Laura passed in March of that year, the house became unbearably quiet. The neighbors brought casseroles, old friends called to check in, my crew from the firehouse came by with condolences. But the person I needed most, Emily, was adrift in her own storm. She came to the funeral, standing stiffly beside me, her eyes red from tears. She whispered apologies for not being around, more for not answering calls, for not sitting with her mother when it mattered. "Ryan said it was better if I stayed away," she admitted. I didn't correct her. What good would it do? Laura was gone. Nothing would change that. Ryan didn't come. He claimed he was on call, but I later learned from a neighbor's son that he had been seen at a rooftop bar in downtown Denver drinking with colleagues. That detail burned itself into my memory, and I wrote it down as soon as I returned from the graveside. Another entry in the growing ledger of betrayal. After the funeral, when the house emptied of visitors, I sat alone in Laura's chair. The quiet pressed down on me. For the first time, I let myself cry without restraint. But grief eventually dried into something else, resolve. That was the turning point. I walked into Laura's old sewing room and looked at the binders stacked along the wall. Years of records, phone logs, social media posts, Bill's notes scribbled late at night. At first, collecting them had been my way of coping, proof that I wasn't imagining things. But now I realized it was more. It was a case. A story told in hard evidence, a trail that led directly back to Ryan and Claire. I began organizing more deliberately. I made a timeline year by year. On one side, Laura's medical milestones, chemo rounds, hospitalizations, birthdays. On the other, Ryan and Emily's excuses captured in screenshots and voicemails. The contrast was damning. When Laura was in ICU fighting pneumonia, they were wine tasting in Napa. When she broke her hip, they were shopping in Chicago. When she begged for her daughter at Christmas, they were toasting champagne in Aspen. The pattern was undeniable. It was around this time that Ryan began calling more often, not to check on me, not to reminisce about Laura, but to discuss my future. His tone was clinical, as if I were one of his patients. He said things like, "Michael, you've been under immense stress. Decision-making at your age can be compromised." He always invoked his sister Claire's advice too. "Claire thinks you'd benefit from professional supervision of your assets." Professional supervision, the phrase chilled me. It wasn't concern, it was a plan. Then one afternoon in May, Ryan called with Emily on speaker. "Dad, we've been talking." Emily began, her voice hesitant. "Ryan thinks it would be safer if you didn't manage the house alone. Maybe you could sign it over to me just so things are organized." I could hear Ryan coaching her in the background, whispering suggestions. I pressed the record button on my phone. I didn't argue. I just let the conversation flow, each word another brick in the case I was building. Ryan grew bolder, mentioning guardianship laws, saying he had an ethical obligation as a doctor to intervene if I showed signs of impaired judgment. Claire's voice even chimed in, once faint but clear, through the speakerphone. "The courts look favorably on children who step in early. It's better to act now before he makes mistakes." I saved that recording. It became one of the crown jewels of my evidence collection. By June, I contacted Patricia Evans, the attorney who had helped me with minor matters years earlier. She was one of the few lawyers Laura had ever trusted. I sat in her office, the manila envelope of recordings in my lap, my voice steady but cold as I explained what Ryan and Claire were plotting. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I played the recording, her jaw tightened. "Michael, this isn't just family tension. This is coordinated coercion. They're laying groundwork for a guardianship petition." "Can they succeed?" I asked. "They can try, but with what you've documented, we have leverage. You're not defenseless." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of power. Patricia advised me to go on offense. Keep documenting. Build character witnesses. Neighbors, doctors, anyone who saw how you cared for Laura. If they try to claim incompetence, we'll bury them in testimony. So I did. I called Dr. Chen, Laura's neurologist, who agreed to write a statement about how I had attended every appointment, managed every detail, while Emily and Ryan were absent. I reached out to Mike Anderson, my old fire chief, who recalled the day I resigned to care for Laura and how Ryan barely showed interest at the retirement gathering. Mrs. Anderson, my neighbor, promised to testify about overhearing Ryan dismiss my grief as confusion. Piece by piece, my wall of defense grew stronger. But it wasn't just defense I wanted, it was justice. Ryan had stolen years from Laura, years she should have spent surrounded by love, not absence. He had stolen closeness from Emily, poisoning her with ideas of boundaries and self-preservation. And now he was preparing to steal the very home Laura and I had built together. I decided then I wouldn't wait for them to file petitions or legal motions. I would strike first. One night, sitting alone at the oak table, I whispered to Laura's memory, "He thinks I'm weak. He thinks grief made me incompetent, but grief made me sharper, and when the time comes, I'll make sure the truth destroys him before he destroys us." The turning point had arrived. I was no longer the man begging for his daughter's presence or the widower crushed by bills and absence. I was a strategist, a witness to betrayal, a father preparing to punish the man who thought he could rewrite our family's story. Ryan believed the future belonged to him and Claire, but I had something stronger than their plans, the truth sharpened over years of quiet suffering, and I was ready to use it. The day Ryan tried to introduce me to a realtor was the day I knew the storm had arrived, but long before that, the trap was already set. After my meeting with Patricia Evans, I doubled down on documentation. I wasn't just collecting anymore, I was curating, weaving every voicemail, every bill, every photograph into a timeline that revealed Ryan and Claire's true intentions. It was tedious work, but it gave me purpose. Purpose was the one thing grief hadn't managed to steal. Each night, I sat in the sewing room with stacks of papers spread across the table. I sorted everything into categories: medical neglect, financial manipulation, social media contradictions, and legal threats. Each file was a story on its own, but together they painted a picture that was undeniable. Ryan and Claire had orchestrated Emily's absence, isolated her from her dying mother, and were now circling the house like vultures. Ryan, of course, thought I was none the wiser. He began visiting more often, Emily in tow, his tone carefully balanced between condescension and false compassion. "Michael, I worry about you living here alone," he said, once eyes scanning the living room like he was already measuring it for new furniture. Emily sat quietly beside him, wringing her hands. She wanted to believe he cared. I could see the doubt flicker in her eyes, but Ryan smothered it with every smooth phrase. Then came Claire. She started showing up with folders of her own polished documents written in legal jargon. She spoke like she was giving a lecture explaining how guardianship laws protected families from unnecessary risk. Every word was designed to sound helpful, but the undertone was clear. They wanted control. I said little during those visits. I smiled politely, asked a question here or there, and always kept my phone recording on the table between us. They never noticed. Or maybe they thought I was too old to manage something as simple as a recording app. Their arrogance was my shield. Patricia and I began to plan. She told me, "Michael, don't tip your hand. Let them think you're pliable. The more they talk, the stronger our case." I took her advice to heart. Each time Ryan mentioned my emotional decline, I nodded and pretended to agree. Each time Claire hinted at professional supervision, I asked her to explain more. Their words dug their own graves, and I made sure to capture every syllable. Meanwhile, I reached out to allies. Dr. Chen gave me copies of her notes. Laura's files showed my constant presence at appointments, contrasted with Emily's absence. Mike Anderson wrote a statement describing how I resigned to care for Laura, sacrificing my career. Neighbors like Mrs. Anderson added testimony of overheard conversations and years of witnessing Ryan's absence. My case was no longer just paperwork. It was a community willing to vouch for the truth. But I wanted more than defense. I wanted offense. Ryan had used social media as his playground, parading luxury vacations while Laura fought for her life. So I used it as evidence. I built binders of screenshots, Aspen ski trips during Christmas Napa retreats, during hospital stays, Chicago shopping sprees, while Laura cried for her daughter. Each photo was time-stamped, each paired with hospital logs or bills. Side by side, they screamed hypocrisy. The more evidence I compiled, the calmer I felt. It was as though the pain of Laura's absence had been channeled into something tangible. My grief had become ammunition. Then, one evening in early 2022, Ryan overplayed his hand. He and Emily came by unannounced. He carried a glossy pamphlet from a real estate agency, the kind with smiling faces and promises of stress-free transitions. He spread it on my table like a salesman. "Michael," he began, "this is Linda Patterson. She specializes in handling estate transitions for families in difficult times. Emily and I think it would be wise to start the process now, before things become too complicated." Emily looked at me nervously, her eyes pleading for me not to be angry. Ryan, however, radiated confidence. He believed the house was already his. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. He rambled about market values, about how selling now would protect me, about how Emily could manage the proceeds responsibly with Claire's guidance. I nodded, pretending to consider it, but inside, I was smiling. Because what Ryan didn't know was that Linda Patterson was already on Patricia's radar. Patricia had discreetly contacted the agency and confirmed Ryan's inquiries. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was proof that he was actively trying to strip me of my home. After they left, I sat in Laura's chair and whispered, "He's walking into it." The next step was strategy. Patricia suggested something bold. "Michael, what if you not only defended yourself, but turned this into a public reckoning? Ryan values his reputation at the hospital, and Claire's entire career depends on her standing at her firm. If we reveal their scheme in front of their peers, it will devastate them more than any quiet court victory ever could." At first, the idea felt too dramatic. Public humiliation. Was that really me? But then I thought of Laura alone in her hospital bed, while Ryan sipped wine in Napa. I thought of every holiday where Emily sat hundreds of miles away, convinced by Ryan that her presence was a burden, and I realized, yes, justice demanded light, not shadows. So Patricia and I began to plan a reveal. We chose the annual fundraising gala at Denver General Hospital, where Ryan never missed an opportunity to network, and where Claire often accompanied him to mingle with donors. It would be the perfect stage. Meanwhile, I kept playing my role. I let Ryan think I was wavering. I told Emily softly, "Maybe your fiancé is right. Maybe I can't manage everything anymore." Her eyes filled with relief. She hugged me, whispering, "Thank you, Dad. This will make things easier." Ryan's smile that day was one of pure triumph. He had no idea that each word was being recorded, filed, and prepared for the night that would end his career. The trap wasn't just set, it was baited, and Ryan was eagerly walking into it. By the time spring turned to summer, my evidence room was overflowing. I had binders, recordings, witness statements, and even Patricia's legal briefs prepared. Every piece of the puzzle was ready. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. One evening, as the sun set behind the Rockies, I sat on the porch with Laura's photo in my lap. I traced the outline of her smile with my thumb. "You always said justice takes patience," I whispered. "Well, Laura, I've been patient long enough. It's time he learns what it feels like to lose everything." And with that, the trap was ready. It was a bright Saturday morning when Ryan finally made his boldest move. I was out back trimming the hedges when I saw his silver BMW pull up in front of the house. Emily was in the passenger seat, her expression unreadable, and behind them another car, a sleek black sedan with the logo of a local real estate agency plastered on the side. I froze clippers in hand. The moment had come. Ryan stepped out first, polished as always in a tailored jacket and slacks. He carried a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, moving with the brisk confidence of a man who believed everything was already his. Emily followed behind her shoulders, hunched, her eyes darting between me and the realtor who emerged from the second car. The realtor, a woman named Linda Patterson, was professional friendly and utterly oblivious to the storm she was walking into. She introduced herself with a warm handshake and began explaining how she specialized in estate transitions for older clients. Her smile was polite, her tone rehearsed. Clearly, Ryan had primed her with a story about me being overwhelmed, maybe even confused. I let them inside. The air in the house was thick with memory. Laura's photographs on the mantle, her books still lined neatly on the shelves. I watched Linda glance around, clipboard in hand, making notes about square footage and features. Ryan guided her like a proud owner, gesturing to the hardwood floors, the remodeled kitchen, the potential for resale. That word resale burned. This wasn't a property, this was my life. We ended up in the living room, the place where Laura had spent her final days. Ryan laid out documents on the coffee table, the same spot where she once kept her knitting basket. "Michael," he said smoothly, "we've already gone over this. Downsizing makes sense. Linda will help with everything legal paperwork, market analysis, buyers. You'll be free of stress." Emily sat quietly beside him, twisting her engagement ring nervously. Her eyes flickered toward me as if begging for understanding. I felt a pang for her, caught in the crossfire of love and manipulation. I cleared my throat. "Ryan, I don't remember agreeing to sell my home." He blinked, caught off guard for just a second, then recovered. "Michael, we had a very clear conversation. You said you were scared that you couldn't manage everything on your own anymore. You asked us to step in." Gaslighting, plain and simple. He wanted to rewrite my words, turn my grief into incompetence. Before I could respond, the front door creaked open. Mrs. Anderson, my neighbor of 20 years, stepped into the yard and then closer to the porch. She had been gardening and had clearly noticed the extra cars. She leaned casually on the fence within earshot. Her timing was divine. Ryan noticed her and stiffened. Linda continued jotting notes, oblivious. Emily glanced nervously between us all. I raised my voice slightly, making sure every word carried. "I never said I wanted to sell. This is my home. My wife and I built our life here." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Michael, you're confused. It's okay, grief does that. That's why we're here, to make sure you don't make mistakes." I saw Mrs. Anderson narrow her eyes. She stepped closer, calling out, "Everything all right, Richard?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, thank you. But let me ask, do I sound confused to you?" Her voice was steady. "Not one bit. You sound like the same sharp man I've known for 20 years. Ryan's face flushed crimson. He turned back to Linda, who suddenly looked uncomfortable. "Sometimes family has difficulty accepting help," he muttered. "That's why professionals like you are so valuable." Linda shifted uneasily, clearly sensing the tension. "Maybe we should reschedule," she offered. Ryan shot her a glare, but forced a polite smile. No, we'll work through it." But I had already made my point. I stood tall, meeting Ryan's gaze. I will not be selling this house. Not today, not ever, and I certainly won't be coerced into signing away my life's work. For the first time, his mask cracked. I saw the frustration beneath the charm, the desperation under the control. He knew he was losing the narrative. Linda excused herself, retreating quickly to her car. Emily followed her out, clearly shaken. That left Ryan and me standing face to face in the living room where Laura had once prayed for her daughter to come home. He lowered his voice to a hiss. "You're making a mistake. Claire and I have already laid the groundwork. If you won't cooperate, we'll pursue other options. Legal ones." I leaned closer, my own voice calm. "And every word you've said has been recorded. Every plan, every threat. Keep pushing, Ryan. The deeper you go, the harder the fall will be. His eyes flickered with uncertainty. For once, he seemed to realize I wasn't the fragile old man he wanted me to be. When he finally stormed out, I sank into Laura's chair. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. The trap had tightened, and he had walked straight into it. Mrs. Anderson came over later that evening, her apron still dusty from gardening. She set a hand on my shoulder. "Richard, I heard everything. Don't you worry, I'll stand by you. That young man thinks he can bully you, but he doesn't know who he's dealing with." I smiled, gratitude warming me. "Thank you. One day soon, he'll learn the truth." That night, I added the day's events to the binder notes. On the confrontation, Mrs. Anderson's presence, Linda Patterson's retreat. Another chapter in the growing story. Ryan thought he had shown strength by bringing a realtor into my living room. But all he had really done was give me more ammunition. And soon, very soon, I would use it. After the realtor incident, I expected Ryan to back off, at least temporarily. But men like him don't retreat, they regroup. Within days, I began to see the shift. It started subtly with carefully staged photographs of Emily and Ryan on his Instagram feed. A dinner at an upscale restaurant, a walk through the Denver Botanic Gardens, a posed shot of him with his arm wrapped around Emily on the couch. His captions carried the same polished tone, supporting family through difficult times. Love is about stepping up. Claire joined in from her end. She posted inspirational quotes about responsibility and the importance of making hard choices for the people we love. Every post was an attempt to rewrite the narrative to turn themselves into devoted caregivers rather than the absentee manipulators I knew them to be. Emily reposted a few of them. That hurt the most. She wrote things like, "Grateful to have a partner who puts family first," as though Ryan's sudden burst of affection was real, but I knew it was staged, a smokescreen designed to sway anyone watching. I'd seen this tactic before. Firefighters call it covering smoke with smoke. A small blaze sets off alarms, and the arsonist distracts the crowd with another fire somewhere else. Ryan and Claire were doing the same thing, creating noise to cover their tracks. But what they didn't realize was that every post became more evidence. I printed screenshots, added them to my growing binders, and wrote notes in the margins. Posted 2 days after trying to force realtor visit caption contradicts recorded threats. Their own vanity was arming me. Then the whispers began. Mrs. Anderson stopped by one evening holding her phone like it was a piece of dynamite. "Richard," she said, "my nephew works in IT at Claire's firm. He says she's been bragging about an upcoming inheritance. She told colleagues her fiancé's father is finally being realistic about his limitations." The words hit like a hammer, realistic about his limitations. That was how she described me, grief-stricken, weak, incompetent. A target, not a man. I asked Mrs. Anderson if her nephew would be willing to provide proof. She nodded solemnly. "He's already seen internal emails. Claire's been openly discussing guardianship laws, even floating the case as a potential teaching example for her colleagues. She's turning your life into her career step." That night, I sat in the sewing room, surrounded by binders, and felt the anger rise like a tide. They weren't just trying to take my home. They were weaponizing my grief, turning it into a legal seminar. A cocktail party anecdote. Laura's absence, Emily's confusion at my sorrow. It was all material for Claire's ambition. Still, I kept my calm exterior. Outwardly, I played the part of the grieving father too tired to fight. When Emily called, I told her softly, "Maybe Ryan's right. Maybe I do need help." I could almost hear Ryan exhale with relief in the background. Each time I said it, his confidence grew. Each time my recordings stacked higher. But behind the scenes, Patricia and I worked tirelessly. She filed copies of every voicemail, every social media screenshot, every statement from neighbors and doctors. "Michael," she said, tapping the mountain of evidence one afternoon, "if they ever attempt a guardianship petition, we won't just win, we'll bury them." I wasn't satisfied with defense alone. I wanted to end this on my terms. So Patricia and I began crafting a plan for exposure. Ryan's career was built on reputation. He was the compassionate surgeon, the golden boy at Denver General. Claire's was built on legal prestige, sharp, ethical, a rising star. Their peers saw them as models of success. What would happen if those same peers heard recordings of them conspiring to strip a grieving man of his home? The opportunity came quicker than I imagined. In June, I received a flyer for Denver General's upcoming fundraising gala. It was their largest event of the year, attended by surgeons, hospital administrators, donors, and local attorneys. Ryan had never missed one. Networking was his lifeblood. Claire often came along, working the room for connections. As I stared at the flyer, a plan crystallized. "Patricia," I said the next day in her office, "what if I made my donation public? Not a small one, a big one. Something tied to Laura's name." She raised an eyebrow. "Michael, are you saying—" "Yes, I want to sell the house myself. I want every cent to go toward cancer research, and I want to announce it at the gala in front of everyone Ryan and Claire respect." Patricia leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. "That would be devastating for them. Their narrative of protecting you collapses if you make a rational, generous public decision. And if we add the recordings—" "They won't just lose," I said. "They'll be exposed." We began making arrangements. I contacted the Cancer Research Foundation, explained my plan to fund a research wing in Laura's memory. They were stunned by the size of the gift, nearly $2.5 million once the house sold, but eager to help organize a public announcement. The hospital agreed to host it at the gala. My role would be simple: stand at the podium, announce the donation, and share Laura's story. But I would do more than that. I would play the recordings. I would show the screenshots. I would let Ryan and Claire's own words condemn them in front of their peers. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his smokescreen campaign. Instagram posts of Emily helping him review medical cases, staged photos of them walking past the hospital, captions about family sacrifice. Claire posted about navigating difficult elder care situations with compassion. They thought they were strengthening their image. In reality, they were building the perfect backdrop for their downfall. One evening, Emily called me in tears. "Dad, Ryan says you're making things harder by resisting. Why can't you just let us help? He's worried about you." My voice cracked, but I kept it steady. "Emily, I know you believe him, but one day you'll see the truth." After the call, I sat in Laura's chair and whispered, "We're almost there, love. Just a little longer." The smoke screen was thick, but I was patient. Fires burn themselves out when starved of oxygen, and soon Ryan and Claire would find themselves gasping for air in a room full of their colleagues. The gala was only weeks away. The stage was set. The night of the gala arrived with a kind of electricity in the air. Denver General had transformed its conference center into a ballroom, round tables draped in white linen crystal glasses, catching the glow of chandeliers, the stage backed by banners about research and innovation. Donors mingled with surgeons, attorneys, and local officials, each dressed to impress. I wore my best navy suit, the one Laura had bought me for our 40th anniversary. As I straightened the tie in the mirror before leaving home, I whispered to her photo on the dresser, "This one's for you." When I arrived, I spotted Ryan almost immediately. He stood near the bar, drink in hand, shaking hands with colleagues. His smile was wide, but his eyes darted nervously. Claire was with him, poised and polished in a dark dress, networking with attorneys from her firm. Emily hovered close, looking both proud and anxious. They hadn't expected me to be there, and they certainly hadn't expected what I was about to do. The program began with hospital administrators praising the generosity of donors, highlighting new research initiatives, sharing stories of hope. Applause echoed through the room. Then came the moment. We'd like to invite Michael Harris to the stage. Tonight, he has an extraordinary announcement. I stood, every eye in the room turning toward me. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. I carried a small folder under my arm, the truth bound in manila. At the podium, I looked out at the sea of faces. Surgeons in tailored suits, lawyers in sleek dresses, reporters with notepads ready. And there, just a few tables back, Ryan and Claire, their smiles frozen as they realized the spotlight was shifting. 3 months ago, I began my voice carrying. I lost my wife Laura after a long battle with cancer. She was the heart of my life, and she faced her illness with courage and grace. Tonight, I want to honor her memory. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. I continued, I have decided to sell the home Laura and I shared for 35 years. The proceeds, $2.5 million, will fund the creation of the Laura Harris Memorial Research Wing here at Denver General. Applause erupted. People rose to their feet. Doctors clapped, administrators smiled, donors leaned in to shake my hand. On the surface, it was a moment of pure generosity, but beneath the applause, I saw Ryan's expression harden. Claire's eyes narrowed. When the room quieted, I leaned forward slightly. But there's more to this story than generosity. You see, for the past few years, I've been told I was unfit to manage my own life. That grief had made me irrational incompetent. That the only way to protect myself was to hand over everything, my home, my future, to others. Gasps. Faces turned toward Ryan and Claire. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Ryan's voice filled the ballroom cold and clinical. Michael, you're showing signs of impaired judgment. The responsible thing would be to transfer the property into competent hands before you make irreversible mistakes. Competent hands. His tone dripped arrogance. And then faint, but clear, Claire's voice in the background. The courts look favorably on children who step in early. It's better to act now before he makes mistakes. A stunned silence followed. Heads swiveled toward the siblings. Ryan's face flushed red. Claire's lips tightened into a thin line. I held up the folder. This isn't the only recording. For years, I've documented every attempt to coerce me, every holiday abandoned while Laura lay dying, every luxury vacation taken in place of a hospital visit, every social media post bragging about self-care while my wife asked for her daughter. Gasps grew louder. A few people shook their heads in disbelief. I clicked to the next slide on the projector. Yes, Patricia had arranged everything. The screen lit up with an Instagram photo, Ryan and Emily clinking champagne glasses in Aspen, caption, finally learning to put ourselves first. Boundaries, SARS self-care. Next to it, hospital records showing Laura's admission date for pneumonia. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is what abandonment looks like. Another click, Claire's email bragging to colleagues about an inheritance, calling me realistic about his limitations. Murmurs turned into outright outrage among the attorneys present. Ryan stood suddenly. This is taken out of context, he shouted, his voice cracking. He's twisting everything. But Patricia, sitting near the back, rose and spoke clearly. In Colorado, recordings made with the consent of one party are legal. Mr. Harris consented. These are admissible. The room erupted in whispers. Ryan sank back into his chair, sweat glistening on his forehead. Claire stared daggers at me, but her colleagues avoided her eyes. I closed the folder gently. I stand here tonight, not as a broken man, but as a witness. I cared for my wife every single day of her illness. I managed our home, our finances, our lives. I was never incompetent. I was devoted. And devotion is not weakness, it is strength. The applause this time was thunderous, but I hardly heard it. My eyes were fixed on Ryan and Claire, their carefully constructed reputations unraveling under the weight of their own words. After I stepped down, people swarmed me with congratulations, handshakes, and kind words. Reporters asked for interviews. Doctors thanked me for my sacrifice. Administrators promised Laura's name would live on in the new research wing. Ryan slipped out quietly with Emily, his face pale. Claire followed, her phone already in her hand, no doubt calculating damage control. But the damage was done. Their peers had heard the truth. Their careers would never recover. Later that night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, I thought of Laura. I pictured her smiling, her hand on mine. We did it, I whispered. He can't hurt us anymore. The reckoning was complete. The morning after the gala, my phone buzzed nonstop. Former colleagues from the fire department called to say how proud they were. Neighbors dropped by with hugs, some even tearing up, as they told me how much Laura's memory deserved that moment. The local paper ran a headline, "Widower donates home to fund cancer research, exposes family betrayal." For me, the headlines didn't matter. What mattered was the silence in my house. For the first time in years, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. Word spread fast in Denver. At the hospital, Ryan was called into an emergency meeting with the ethics board. Colleagues who once praised him now whispered behind his back. Patients requested transfers to other doctors. His department head put him on leave pending investigation. Claire fared no better. Within a week, her firm placed her on suspension. The Colorado bar opened an inquiry into her conduct, especially after Patricia supplied evidence of her emails bragging about an inheritance case. Colleagues who had once admired her ambition now distanced themselves. In the world of law, reputation is currency, and hers had collapsed overnight. Emily was the hardest part. She showed up at my door 2 weeks later. Her eyes were swollen, her clothes wrinkled, her voice hoarse. She looked like a child again, not the grown woman she was. She stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her and collapsed into Laura's recliner, burying her face in her hands. "Dad," she whispered, "everything's gone. Ryan suspended. Claire's firm fired her. And Ryan, he blames me. He says I should have convinced you sooner. I sat across from her, my hands folded. For years, I had dreamed of this moment of Emily finally seeing the truth. But sitting there, I felt no victory, only sadness. "Emily," I said softly, "he used you. He twisted your love into obedience. That isn't your fault." She shook her head violently. "I let him keep me away from Mom. I let him convince me boundaries were healthy. I let her die without me there. That's my fault." Her words pierced me deeper than Ryan's ever had. I wanted to tell her she was blameless, but the truth was more complicated. Yes, she had been manipulated, but she had also chosen convenience over courage. The scars would never fully fade. I leaned forward, resting a hand over hers. "Your mother loved you. She asked for you until the very end because in her heart, you were always her girl. Nothing can erase that." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She whispered, "I want to make it right. I want to help with the research wing. I want to volunteer, do whatever I can. Please, Dad, let me try." I studied her for a long moment. Part of me wanted to push her away to let her feel the emptiness I had endured. But another part, the part Laura would have nurtured, recognized a spark of redemption. "You can help," I said finally. "But understand this, Emily trust has to be rebuilt. Slowly, brick by brick. It isn't inherited, it's earned." She nodded, her shoulders shaking. "I'll earn it." In the months that followed, the Laura Harris Memorial Research Wing came to life. I sold the house, our house, for $2.5 million. Walking through it one final time was harder than I imagined. Every room whispered memories. Emily's childhood bedroom, Laura's kitchen, the sewing room filled with binders of evidence. I paused longest in the living room, my hand resting on Laura's chair. I kept my promise, I whispered. He didn't take it. The sale closed quickly. Construction crews transformed the donation into something tangible, laboratories filled with light hallways lined with plaques honoring donors, a conference room bearing Laura's name. Watching it rise from the ground was like watching her spirit live on. I moved into a modest apartment downtown, walking distance from the hospital. It was smaller, simpler, but it felt lighter. I began volunteering as a patient advocate, sitting with families who were just beginning the journey I had walked. I held hands, listened to stories, and offered advice from a place of hard-earned truth. Ryan never reached out. His suspension turned into termination, his medical license under review. Claire fought her case for months, but eventually resigned from her firm. I heard through whispers that she left Denver altogether, seeking a fresh start somewhere else. Emily kept her word. She showed up at the research wing every week, helping with fundraisers, greeting families, volunteering in support groups. She never asked me to forget the past, she only asked for a chance to prove herself. Over time, the walls between us began to crack. Slowly, carefully, I let her back in. 6 months after the gala, the research wing held its grand opening. Doctors, patients, and donors gathered in a bright new atrium. A bronze plaque was unveiled, the Laura Harris Memorial Research Wing, funded by the devotion of Michael Harris. I stood there, surrounded by applause, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. Not because justice had been served, though it had. Not because Ryan and Claire had fallen, though they had. But because Laura's name would live on, tied not to betrayal, but to hope. That night, Emily and I stood together in front of the plaque. She slipped her hand into mine, her voice trembling. "Mom would be proud of you." I squeezed her hand. "She'd be proud of us. But remember, this isn't about revenge. It's about legacy." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time in years, I saw not the manipulated daughter who had drifted away, but the little girl who once decorated the Christmas tree with her mother, crooked angel and all. Justice had been delivered. Redemption had begun. And as I walked out of the research wing that night, I whispered to Laura in my heart, we endured the fire, and in the ashes, we built something that will last.